So there's a section of the new Lagos anti-cultism law that states that if you, as a citizen, know anyone that's engaged in cultism but fail to report them to the police, you could go to jail for 2 years. And that's just really troubling. This law that was signed in March covers a lot more ground than the old one, including increasing the sentence for convicted cultists to 21 years in prison and recommending between 7 to 15 years for willing collaborators of cultists and cultism. The law also expands the scope of cult activities from targeting just students of tertiary institutions to just about anyone anywhere in the state. A lot of the provisions of this law have been praised by many, especially elected public officials, as a right step forward in combating cultism in Lagos. And they are right. But there's a particular section that's raising a lot of eyebrows. This section stipulates that parents who are aware of their child's involvement in cultism must report them to the police or face 2 years in prison or a fine of 500,000 naira. It's important for me to note here that this particular section of the law affects just about anyone who fails to report their knowledge of a cultist to the police, but it mentions parents in particular, so that's what we are going to focus on. While this section might appear well-intentioned to compel civic responsibility, what it also does is it puts a target on the backs of parents of people suspected of cultism. And for a terror of that to sink in, you have to think about how law enforcement mostly works in Nigeria. For example, police officers are not allowed to arrest anyone for the crime of someone else that they happen to be related to, as long as they have aided the alleged crime in no way. Yet, law enforcement officers have been known to do this for years whenever they are desperate enough to arrest a suspect. So what this new law does is provide legal cover for this abominable practice, regardless of if the guilt of the parents can be determined. Remember that this section is not saying that parents must have actively aided the crime of their child, just that they failed to report them to the police. And what's even more puzzling is there's another section of this law that allows people that are being coerced to join cult groups the grace of 14 days to report to the police. But this timeline does not exist for parents. We spoke to a bunch of lawyers about this section of the law and they were pretty unanimous in their reaction. And that reaction was, wait, what? And that's because this section has less to do with the proper position of the law and more to do with imposing excessive moral responsibility on parents and criminalizing their failure to rise to the occasion. In fact, when Governor Biggie Sanwo-Olu signed this law in March, he said that he wants it to make parents more responsible and for them to pay more attention to the upbringing of their children so that they don't become a burden to the society. This was the same position that Lagos lawmakers stuck to while they were deliberating on this law, despite some of the muted arguments against it from the public. Make no mistake about the fact that Lagos State has a troubling and explosive court problem that needs to be reined in with all sorts of legal machinery that the laws afford the government. And the new Lagos anti-cultism law goes to great lengths to ensure that people really think twice before they engage in cultism. But vindictively punishing parents for the sins of their children, it doesn't make much sense. And even worse, it's dangerous.